Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Boyt, and I'm the head of the math department at Great Neck North Middle School out on Long Island. I hope you have been enjoying the symposium so far. Uh, I'm going to be presenting to you on research that I did a year ago for my dissertation. It's crazy to think that at about this time, 1 year ago, just as the lockdown proceedings were beginning, I was prepping to give my dissertation defense to the three members of my committee. I'm sure some of you who are watching are also in that stage right now. And some of you might also be at the beginning of your doctoral research. And I remember being at this symposium 3 years ago, and that happened to be where I met my mentor, Dr. Stephen Kotok. So it's crazy how far you can come in such a short period of time, but just in a couple of years, maybe you will be here doing the same thing that I'm doing. Although hopefully by then we will be able to present in person, just as I saw in the previous symposiums. So my areas of research focus on building teacher capacity. And I think, many of us, when we got into the profession, we thought about it being more of a passion rather than a job or a career. Yet I think all of us can find people that work in our buildings that they can become very disenfranchised or disillusioned by the profession and find themselves complaining about whatever it is, but they likely weren't that type of person when they entered the profession. So anything that we can do as school leaders to help build capacity in teachers can certainly help to build climates in schools and allow teachers to continue to improve at their craft. The old saying goes, if you aren't getting better, you're getting worse. So anything that we can do to make those that we serve better will benefit the profession in the long run. So my research is entitled, Where Does Mentoring Matter Most? And I told you that this a year ago, I was presenting this as my dissertation defense. So let's get to it. So Sinek said it's important to start with why. So the question is, why is it that I would choose to present on new teacher mentoring and its correlation with job satisfaction? So my first year was a rough one. I started teaching. I was a new member of the New York City Teaching Fellows, and I came into the profession bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to make a difference. And it was a very rude awakening for me because not only did I not know what I was doing, but the supports that I was offered wasn't really working for me. And those of you who have gone through teaching in New York State, you know that in your first year, you're entitled to a mentor. I was assigned a mentor who came into my class once a week, watched me bomb my lessons, and then gave me feedback, which basically told me everything that I was doing wrong. So, needless to say, that didn't help build my capacity. It just brought me down further. And really, I considered quitting for a long period of time. And if it weren't for some informal mentors that I had in my building, I don't know if I would have stuck around. And as crazy as that story is, I know that I'm not alone in my story, and the statistics indicate that. The percentage of teachers leaving the profession is shocking and staggering. Between 9 and 11% of teachers leave the profession within a year of their start date. Almost half of all teachers leave within 5 years. Although research suggests that mentoring has helped, to what extent? If teachers are still leaving the profession in droves year after year, even though they have been entitled to and assigned mentors, what is that saying? The purpose of this study is where it comes in, is to analyze the difference in mentoring practices conducted for new teachers across schools with varying percentages of economically disadvantaged students, to examine the specific mentoring activities that new teachers perceive as most strongly correlated with job satisfaction, and finally, to determine if the quality of the mentor-mentee relationship has a stronger correlation with job satisfaction than the quantity of mentoring activities in which the mentor and mentee engage. In other words, what has a stronger correlation with job satisfaction? The activities that mentors and mentees engage in, or the strength of the relationship between the mentee and the mentor? The theoretical frameworks that guided this research first was Seligman's theory of learned helplessness, which posits that helplessness is actually a learned behavior, that it's not ingrained in us to become helpless individuals, that is something that is a learned behavior. When people fail at something over and over again, it feels like the circumstance is beyond their control and they give up more easily. On the other hand, you have learned optimism, which means that if people learn to be more optimistic, then optimism becomes a learned behavior. Also informing my research is Ingersoll's theory of teacher development. And Ingersoll focuses on human capital, right? If we preserve the human capital in educational systems, that improves teacher quality. And mentoring is a key component of new teacher induction. If you have successful mentoring, you're going to have more successful new teacher induction, which leads to improved teacher practices. And in the long run, improved teacher practices will lead to greater student success. Okay, so how do these theories, these theoretical frameworks, connect to the study? Okay, it connects to the phenomenon of 44% of teachers leaving the profession within 5 years. Okay, a successful mentor-mentee relationship would be predicated upon fostering learned optimism. Without proper mentoring programs, teachers can't grow. If teachers can't grow, teachers won't stay. And if teachers don't stay, students won't learn. Therefore, if mentors can conduct activities and build relationships more strongly tied to job satisfaction, this could lead mentors to use particular strategies or particular approaches, which leads to teacher retention, which ultimately leads to greater student success. And this leads to the importance of the study. These results should shine a light on practices that mentors could do with mentees in order to keep teachers in the classrooms, particularly in high-need schools. All right, and this is important because it solves problems of educational inequity, because education, at the very core of it, it's a civil rights issue. Okay, these issues that are happening, particularly in high-need schools, this turnover that's happening is actually imposing on students civil rights. So improving these systems is a win for civil rights. And finally, this addresses the professional standard of educational leadership, which is effective educational leaders develop professional capacity and practice of school personnel to promote each student's academic success and well-being. Which this connects to the social justice mission. Problems discussed in the study are social justice issues. The recommendations will ultimately improve mentoring practices in underprivileged districts, thus improving the educational programs in those districts, thus leading to greater student success. This brings me to my research questions. To what degree do mentoring activities differ in schools with higher percentages of economically disadvantaged students? To what extent is there a correlation between specific mentoring practices and early career teachers' job satisfaction? And finally, to what extent is teacher satisfaction correlated with mentor activities and mentor relationship? Does this correlation vary by percentage of economically disadvantaged students? And again, this goes back to that big question: what has a stronger correlation with job satisfaction? The activities that mentors and mentees engage in, or the strength of the relationship between the mentor and the mentee? The definition of terms I'd like to focus on are early career teacher, which is a teacher that has been teaching full-time for fewer than 5 years, Job satisfaction was measured by Hinshaw-Atwood's anticipated turnover scale. The mentoring relationship was measured by the Berg's mentorship effectiveness scale. And finally, an economically disadvantaged student. Because as you know, this study is working with schools of varying degrees of economically disadvantaged student. We're using New York State's definition of that, which is any student who participates in or it has a family member living in the household that participates in at least one economic assistance program, such as Social Security, food stamps, free and reduced price lunch, etc. Okay. The themes that emerged from the literature. First, that mentoring has a historical basis. It has a basis in New York State education since 2004. If you started in New York State in 2004 or later, you were guaranteed a mentor for your first year of teaching, and that entailed 30 hours of work between the mentor and the mentee. Now, a wide variety of activities between mentors and mentees have been suggested. And research suggests that, generally speaking, new teacher mentoring has a positive correlation with job satisfaction, although there have been exceptions in the literature. And there are still gaps in the research. Okay. Yes, there are a variety of activities that have been suggested between mentors and mentees. And the law states that mentors and mentees must engage in 30 hours together. But it doesn't say exactly what mentors and mentees should be doing together. It offers suggestions, but no requirements as to how those 30 hours are spent. And furthermore, there is no research that tells us what activities that mentors and mentees engage in correlate the strongest with job satisfaction. And that's where this study comes in. Okay. To work through my 3 research questions, I ran an ANOVA to answer the first question. I ran a Pearson's correlation coefficient to answer the second question. And then finally, I ran a Pearson's correlation coefficient to answer the third question. Okay. Reliability and validity were assured in previous administrations of my survey. 651 people agreed to participate in the survey. So there is some strength in those numbers. And then finally, throughout the process, both anonymity and confidentiality were maintained. So the sample of my study was 651 participants across 9 districts plus 1 regional site. So essentially 10 entities within varying percentages of economically disadvantaged students across Long Island. Okay. Once I received the data, the schools were stratified into 5 categories. There were very low percentage of economically disadvantaged students, which was 0 to 20% of the students qualified under that title of economically disadvantaged. Low was 20 to 40% economically disadvantaged. Moderate was 40 to 60% economically disadvantaged. High was 60 to 80% economically disadvantaged. And very high was 80 to 100% of students being economically disadvantaged. And again, the surveying here were schools across Long Island with varying degrees of economically disadvantaged students. So here's how the 651 people were broken down. Okay, as you can see, a majority of my study came from very low to low percentages of economically disadvantaged students. And you'll notice as well that 111 of my 651 were early career teachers. So 111 of my participants were teachers in their first 5 years of teaching. And those are things that are important to keep in mind as you look at my results. Again, the survey given was adapted from Gordon. So the first section was background. First section was mentoring activities, which identified which activities teachers and mentors engaged in. The mentorship effectiveness scale measured the strength of the relationship between the mentor and the mentee from the perspective of the mentee. And then finally, the anticipated turnover scale measured teacher satisfaction and the likelihood of teacher retention. Okay. Teachers were given 3 weeks to complete the survey. Reminder emails were sent each week. The survey was first sent via Qualtrics. Okay. Data was examined as a whole after stratification by percentage of economically disadvantaged students and after stratification by early career teachers. Okay. I did end up switching from Qualtrics to SurveyMonkey. But that was due to a technical issue with Qualtrics, but that didn't have an effect on my final results. Again, the survey participation was voluntary and anonymous. I sought superintendent approval before the survey was delivered. The superintendents themselves sent the survey to teachers, and I found that that practice would be more effective because if it were me who was a stranger to them, sending the survey, it was my belief that that would decrease the likelihood of responses as opposed to getting the email from the superintendent, who is a member of the school community. And most importantly, an email from the superintendent would be less likely to end up in participants' spam folders. And again, the responses were, are, continue to be, and always will be confidential. Okay. Again, questions, to what degree do mentoring activities differ in schools with higher percentage of economically disadvantaged students? I used a one-way ANOVA to analyze that data. To what extent is there a correlation between specific mentoring practices and new teachers' job satisfaction? I used a bivariate correlational analysis. And to what extent is teacher satisfaction correlated with mentor activities and mentor relationship? Does this correlation vary by percentage of economically disadvantaged students? I used a bivariate correlational analysis. And again, SurveyMonkey collected the data due to the technical issues that I had with Qualtrics, but that had no bearing on the results of this survey. And I used SPSS to analyze all of the data. Those of you who are taking the quantitative classes right now, I know you are familiar with using SPSS to analyze your data. I'm sure you're getting close to that phase in your academic careers as well. So finally, here are the results, or here are the results and the findings. There were very few significant differences among mentoring activities with respect to varying percentages of economically disadvantaged students. So the activities that mentors and mentees are engaging in more well-to-do districts, they're the same activities that mentors are engaging in schools with a higher percentage of economically disadvantaged students. The most widespread activity is still the mentor watching the mentee teach. Same thing that I had, almost 20 years ago at the start of my career. As they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But the mentoring activities in the next slide indicate what is most strongly correlated with job satisfaction. And what you'll see in this next slide is the activities most strongly, all of the activities with how strongly correlated they are with job satisfaction. Now, the 4 items that are in black, that are highlighted in black, those were the 4 activities that mentors and mentees engaged in the most throughout all 5 levels of percentage of economically disadvantaged students. And what I found was there were activities such as time management and the mentee watching the mentor teach that actually had stronger correlations with job satisfaction than the 4 most popular activities engaged in by mentors and mentees. But I thought that this was the most striking find. And that was, so if you look on the left-hand side, these were metrics of mentor-mentee relationship. My mentor demonstrated content expertise. My mentor suggested appropriate resources, and my mentor was accessible. Versus the activities on the right-hand side, understanding the school's evaluation process, time management, understanding of curriculum, and observing and reflecting the mentor's instruction. What I found was all of the activities in which mentors and mentees engage had a lower correlation with job satisfaction than the strength of the mentor and the mentee's relationship. Meaning every aspect of the strength of the relationship was stronger than any of the activities in which mentors and mentees engaged. So these are the implications of those findings. Again, there is a mismatch between what mentors and mentees are doing together and what most strongly correlates with job satisfaction. And furthermore, the strength of the mentor-mentee relationship is more strongly correlated with job satisfaction than any of the activities in which mentors and mentees engage. Again, all of mentoring buckets are important, but it is important, first and foremost, for mentors and mentees to focus on their relationship. Now, the limitations of this study is that it was conducted only on Long Island. All right, there wasn't any work done in New York City, and part of the reason that I stuck to Long Island and not to New York City is because there were some potential hiccups in gaining IRB approval from New York City and having permission to research in New York City. All right. So here are the recommendations for future practice based on what was stated in the implications. First and foremost, districts need to be mindful in who they are choosing to be their new teacher mentors. The research also suggests that you should choose a mentor within the same discipline because that would help with things like understanding of curriculum, co-planning, and the mentee watching the mentor teach. Okay? All of those having strong correlations with job satisfaction. Third, and importantly, choose a mentor with the ability to build relationships. As we said before, the strength of the mentor-mentee relationship is much more strongly correlated with job satisfaction than any of the activities in which mentors and mentees engage. And finally, districts should act to design activities to foster the mentor-mentee relationship. That might be mentor-mentee luncheons or going to professional development together. Anything to help solidify that relationship is going to help with job satisfaction amongst early career teachers and thus lead to potentially greater retention and ultimately greater student success. Now, my recommendations for research would be to conduct a qualitative study. We talked about the what a lot, but not so much the why and the how. Studies on informal mentors, as I mentioned, the informal mentors in my first year kind of got me through the process. So what is it that the informal mentors and schools are doing to help mentees? And finally, conducting this study and seeing if the results could be replicated in an urban district, such as New York City, would help increase the validity of the findings, the reliability of the findings in the study. So bringing it back to my first year, where does mentor matter most? You got to remember those mentees. Remember yourself in your first year. Remember some of those teachers that you may have encountered in your first year that didn't make it through that first year. Okay. Where does mentoring matter most? It matters everywhere. But focusing on who mentors and how they mentor will lead to an increase of teacher satisfaction, thus hopefully leading to greater teacher retention and ultimately leading to greater student success. Thank you for your time.